We will talk about the power of the dark side and basically dark patterns. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Emilia Ciardi. I currently work at IGT, which is a huge gambling firm, and I work as a head of product on the mobile sphere. So I'm pretty much used to talk about dark patterns because it's something that in the gambling market, actually, we really want to get rid of and spot them as soon as they, start to sneak into our own user experience, because we live in a regulated world, so it's very important to keep everything transparent for the final users. I also work in Sparkling Labs, which is a very small startup, which I co-founded with a partner, and there I'm working as creative director for all the mobile apps that we create. So today we're going to talk about dark patterns, but what are dark patterns? Basically they are a type of user interface that appears to have been carefully crafted to trick users into doing things which are not in their best interest. And in this sentence, we should really be looking at a single word, which is important, which is the carefully, meaning that this is not casual, it's not a random thing that is happening, but it's something that some people actually strived to create in just that way. So they really want to get that effect. It's not something that is, just randomly generated by, by mistake. So how do we distinguish dark patterns from anti-patterns? Basically, anti-patterns are sort of mistakes that we do while designing our product. The very different thing is that the anti-pattern does not work, while the dark pattern, well, it works, but it works in a very special way. So the anti-pattern in general is counterproductive, while the dark pattern is productive, but just for one party, which is the company that is using the dark pattern. So basically anti-patterns are just purely executed and they are plain bad design. On the other side, the dark pattern exploits human weaknesses but are also carefully crafted, so you won't see anything actually done poorly or something like that. It's all very intentional. The very important thing about anti-pattern is that they can easily be identified with metrics, because if we keep our own mobile app or website with all the KPIs to measure performances, basically we can easily spot anti-pattern, because they will cause a drop into, whatever we're trying to accomplish. We will have drop-offs from our own users. On the other hand, the dark pattern are difficult to identify with metrics or with automated tools, because they actually work well for whatever we are trying to achieve. So they just pass all the tests. So at the end of the day, the anti-pattern are never intentional. They are doing just something harmful for our own business, and they are just plain bad design, while the dark pattern are not always intentional, because they can also sneak in by mistake sometimes, very rarely. I'll show you an example of that, but usually they are carefully crafted and intended just to work that way. So how do they come into the scene, meaning why we are seeing dark patterns? It happens because, in a way, they are sort of the degenerate children of persuasive design. If we read this sentence by Robert Hochman from the book Designing the Obvious, from a business perspective, as designers, our job is to compel people to do what we want them to do. I mean, this is a strong, very strong phrase, and at its core, the ethical message is not so good, if we consider that. I mean, it's something, it is like, it is giving us permission to do whatever we want with users, as long as we get them to do whatever we want. So it's sort of dangerous thinking that way, and that's why we started to see more and more dark patterns in a certain period, right after the persuasive design basically was exploding, was big. But also we are pretty much used to see things that are a little bit shady. So we actually have become quite accustomed to see great tricks used into user experiences. For example, this is just Adobe with the Creative Cloud subscription process. Basically what you see here is that even if the subscription plan is yearly, and it always stays like that, you do just one payment for all the yearly subscription, what they actually show you is the monthly fee. That's great. That's great because you actually are trying to hide the final price to users. But we are so much accustomed to it. We never criticize people for doing something like that because it's just how it works. It's like going to the supermarket and seeing all those prices with the .99 at the end. Of course, it is meant to disguise a little bit the price so you don't see the huge round number. And at the end of the day, we have become so accustomed to this kind of pricing model that we actually expect to find it when we go to the store. If we don't see it, we are so that these prices are strange. Why they don't have the 99 cents or something? So that's to explain we are really accustomed to these sort of tricks. And actually, the science says that to be tricky, to be manipulative is sort of our second nature. In fact, by the age of 4, the 90% of children know how to lie. 60% of people can go 10 minutes without lying, so be careful because today all the speakers are talking way more than 10 minutes each. 90% of people looking for a date online lie in their profile. Yeah, bad news, guys. And humans are lied to as many as 200 times a day. So maybe we should just embrace it because it's our nature. Science says it is. So why don't do that? And also, it seems that also big guys are not, sort of alien to this kind of techniques because, see, this is Apple. And Apple actually, in the very first version of iOS, sort of, used to make privacy-related information hidden and tricky. Basically, you can see that to go to this final setting, which is about the limitation of ad tracking, so tracking the ads on my own phone, so this is data that maybe I don't want to give to Apple. Basically, you have to go general about advertising, and then finally I get to this setting, to this switch. So this is not at all an intuitive navigation path. It's something that actually is meant to hide away this setting because Apple likes to have all of the ads tracks on our own devices. And there is also another thing. Even if you arrive, because you're a very smart guy, to this final setting, then it is expressed in a sort of a tricky way because it doesn't say disable tracking or something. It says, or if basically the tracking is enabled, it says limit ad tracking. What does it actually mean? Because I'm just used to see that if this is on, if the switch is on, you are tracking me. If the switch is off, you are not tracking me. So I go to this final page, I see the switch is off, and I'm fine. I can easily think that I am fine and there is no tracking, but actually this works in the exact opposite way. So I should switch it off to disable the tracking. So you see, this is confusing, and it is carefully crafted to be like that. So it's a true and dark pattern, I mean. But it is not so bad, or at least they try to improve on it with successive versions, so at least they fixated the navigation so that you go privacy, advertising, and then finally you get to this thing that is still expressed in a tricky way. But okay, they are Apple, they can do it. But now, this behavior is not elegant, but it's not, devastating. Okay, if you are really careful and you actually read the labels, you can still successfully disable this tracking thing and you're fine. But Let's see some real-world example of dark patterns that are actually aggressive, just to have a bit more understanding of the possible spectrum. So here we can see a company, an insurance company actually, that at the start of their own service did this thing. Basically, you would enroll for a 30-day free trial, but at the end of this period, automatically the premium, so paid service, would start with monthly fees, basically. The problem, this is also something that we are used to see, and it's not bad in itself. The thing is that during the enrollment process, they were never saying this clearly to the user. So people would go through accepting this deal because it was basically 30 days of a free service, and they didn't know that at the end of that period, there was this forced continuity to actually start paying for the service each month. So, yeah, this is definitely dark, because in a way, you have to tell users that they will start to pay after that period, and it will take an active action to disable that behavior. Here we can see another example of something very bad that is happening, which is the sneak into cart dark pattern. It works like this. You put into your cart an Apple iPad, and without anything, any active action, you also get the Apple iPad case into the cart. So someone who doesn't know much about, technology and maybe what is actually the deal may think that this is mandatory, that you have to get both the Apple iPad and the related case, but these are not two products that you have to take together for any reason. It's just the company, in this case Comet, which went out of business, you wonder why, was actually, just trying to sneak other stuff into your cart. So, yeah, this is also dark, maybe darker than the one before, because imagine a poor old woman going through this buy because she wants an iPad to talk with his, son far away in another country, and then she just has to buy both of them. It's like, to do a real-world comparison, it's like you are buying, a leaf of bread, and then a supermarket manager tries to sneak in a jar of marmalade or something like that because it's good if you take it along with the bread, just like with the iPhone pad and case. So, it's true that dark patterns can be quite, blatant, like the ones we have seen, but there are also dark patterns which are sort of, grayish, like this, because basically Oxfam is a charity firm, and she was proposing this kind of form on her website. You could give a donation, and you could choose between regular monthly donation and single donation, but the default is on the regular monthly donation. So this is, we can look at this in two different ways. We can call it a smart default, or we can call it forced continuity, so classifying it as a true dark pattern. The thing is, because it is a charity firm, we can actually say that this is sort of gray. You still have the chance to disable the regular monthly donation thing, and it's actually not confusing because the form is very simple, so you very clearly see what you're doing in a way, so it's sort of grayish. It's like someone like him, yeah, not really the bad guy, but maybe, someone who's not pretty, yeah. But why are they doing that? They are doing that because it works. This is a chart about organ donation in European countries, and I think you will not be surprised to know that all the countries that are getting poor results, so the gray countries, adopted the strategy where you have to actively, as a citizen, basically give the permission to donate your organ. On the other side, the green countries basically take it as a given. So the default is, the smart default is that you are basically going to donate your organ, and you have to actively take action if you want to deny that. So yeah, it works. It basically works. So should we embrace the dark side of UX? Well, let's say that you cannot go into dark patterns without considering the consequences, which are not always so good. The first one is the busy call center. Basically, you will get a lot of angry people calling your company, people who ask to basically roll back something that they have done, either on your mobile app or your website. And you will get a lot of criticism, like happened to several airline companies who were just using their website to force the insurance on the baggage. So it was very difficult to take that out. But they had to roll back because their call centers were actually clogged by incoming calls from angry customers. The other thing is about public shaming. We live in a social era, so it's very easy, and on mobile even so, because of the reviews, to actually point out bad behaviors from companies. So you could end up really damaging your reputation. And this takes us to the final consideration. You are sort of probably going with short-term profit but long-term damage. So you should really be careful about that. For example, what happened to CreditExpert, the one with the forced continuity? Basically, after they did that, for a few months, it was enough to just look for their name to have the search coming up with terms like scam. So their reputation was pretty much ruined at that time, but yet today they are still in business. They have completely redesigned their processes and their user experience. And so it's somewhat hard to say if they really had long-term consequences. The thing is, established brands have a lot to lose. But small companies sometimes use this kind of dark patterns to actually, because they don't have anything to lose, and maybe they can use them to grow. So why big brands use them, or in general brands? Sometimes it's a matter of high-pressure work environment and huge emphasis on metrics. So you're only worried basically about the final result. You really want people to sign that insurance on the baggage. And so if you just look at the metrics, then you can be actually tempted to use dark patterns. There's also social proof. If someone is already using that technique in your market, in your sphere, then you feel like you are, you're just good. You can use it because someone else is using it. And again, they are not automatically detectable. So sometimes they just can pass through all the QA, all the processes that inside our company are meant to improve and check the user experience. Why do we bother talking about dark patterns? So, because it seems that probably we shouldn't use them. Basically, they are an astonishing and surprising way to talk about good design, and sometimes we can learn something from them. Now, they have been quite extensively classified and studied, but this classification in this study is almost about online websites and not much about mobile. The reason is that on mobile phones is more difficult to actually put dark patterns in an app for several reasons. First of all, there is the store review process on Apple, of course, which actually, sort of tells you you should stay away from something that is not quite nice. But there is also the user reviews, which is something quite huge. I mean, if you're doing something that is not quite right, you may get a lot of bad reviews. and you may get a lot of uninstall. So it's pretty easy to actually have direct damages from using dark patterns on the mobile sphere. But they are still there. They are a little bit more discreet, and also they try to disappear as soon as they have reached the goals for what they were meant initially. So they are very quickly disappearing with new versions of the app. Let's see some of the dark patterns that are quite unique to the mobile sphere. One is the notification nightmare, basically using notifications against the user's interest. At the start of many applications, you are asked for the permission to use a notification on your phone, and this is basically something that is meant to give you an added value. So you get a useful alert for something that's related to the task you want to accomplish with the app, for example. But creating a notification nightmare is actually using it in a way that the user didn't approve explicitly and is not expecting. Like, for example, some games use notifications to inform the user about their next game. So they use it not as a tool to improve the user experience of the app, but basically as a marketing channel, as an additional marketing channel, which is not the intended behavior of notifications, and create a real notification nightmare. If you start to have more than one app just telling you the news and the new games from that company and that other company, this is not what you want, because the notification on your phone is something pretty personal, and you want them to basically add value to your day and not spam you with information you don't need. So we should avoid to do that. I'm not saying we don't have to do it in any form, but if we put the user in control, we give him granular level settings, and we start with the smart default, which is not aggressive, basically we can get a user to explicitly sign on for marketing messages on notifications, but we should never force them on users. So we can do that, but with a little bit more of, being nicer to our users. Another typical dark pattern that only exists on mobile phone is the permission machine gun. So you start with your application, you launch it for the first time user experience, and you basically are subjected to this rapid fire away of requests for user permission. So the location services, the contact book, and then the camera, whatever. So a very, very, very fast sequence of this permission asked. This is not good, because basically if we do that, what we are actually trying to do is to avoid explaining why, and just ask all of those permissions, so the user feels so overwhelmed that he may accept them all without actually thinking why he is granting those permissions to the app. The way we should go about this is basically embrace permission priming. So basically, we try and explain to people why we are asking for those permissions. And also for all those permissions which are actually useful right from the first time that the user opened the app, we may adopt a lazy strategy to ask for them. So for example, if I am using Instagram, Instagram won't ask to use my camera right when I first launch the app, but just when I start to undertake a very specific task that needs the camera to go on. For example, this is a good permission priming from Foursquare, and basically it takes care of explaining why Foursquare needs the current location, and most importantly, Foursquare explains why there's value for you into accepting notifications, because you should always show to the user what's in it for him, rather than, you know, going grand with big words or something. And this basically awares the necessity, prevents to go with dark patterns, but actually, you know, it is effective. So you don't need dark patterns if you go this way. Another common dark pattern is the bait and switch, where you're actually showing something to the user which seems so good for them, like this great piece of cheese. But then, probably the little guy won't get the cheese in this case. And this is actually what we are trying to accomplish with bait and switch dark patterns. So allure the user with something nice and then take it away. An example of this is on Hotels.com mobile app. Maybe they have already changed it, but if you look carefully at this page, which is of course, this is the website, for your search, there are several different hotels, and all the hotels, if you look carefully, they have the same telephone number. But this number is very close to the address of the specific hotel. So if you don't notice that the number is always the same, you easily think that this is the phone number for the hotel. But instead, it is the phone number for Hotels.com. So you will talk to an operator of Hotels.com and not to the hotel directly. So you want to talk with the hotel. You think you're doing that, but actually an operator of Hotels.com will respond the call. And this is also on the mobile phone, but in a worse matter, because on the mobile side, since it is repeated and you see it's always the same, you can easily spot that, and it is pretty much clear what you're doing. But here, it's much more difficult, because in the listing view, you don't see any phone number. So you tap on a single hotel, and you think you're getting just the data for the hotel. And again, the telephone number is close to the address. It's only natural that I think that this is the phone number of the hotel, but then I tap and I talk to an operator of Hotels.com. So it's sort of bait and switch. The another very common dark pattern on mobile is friend spam, which is called growth hacking for people who want to present it in a good way, actually. And this is something that actually happens so often, and there was a period where Facebook had basically to shut it down somewhat, because at the start of this growth hacking thing, basically you could ask for just one permission to the user to access, I don't know, your contact list or something like that, and then the application was allowed to do whatever it wants with those contacts. So sharing the score at the end of a game, for example, and basically send bulk messages to all your contact list with no further permission. But of course, since it was really abused, then Facebook and other social networks started to prevent it, making it outlaw. But here you can see, for example, something that is quite enlightening, because what you can see here is basically a sort of representation of the number of invites per phone that some of the most common communication applications generated during 2014. And this is about invites sent via SMS. So not like WhatsApp or shares on Facebook, but SMS. So a player like Glide basically generated a lot of invites, and also get a huge amount of complaints. But basically Glide, which was a startup at the moment, with this growth hacking system, managed to acquire a huge user base. And then, when it was done, she switched off all the dark patterns for growth hacking, but still it had this huge user base. So the goal was accomplished, and so we can say that they went dark for a limited period of time just to enable this growth, and then they switched it back to an ethical, fine, nice behavior. What they did was they basically asked you for the permission to go with your contact list, and then from that they sent bulk messages to everyone. Misdirection is about actually confuse the people into thinking they're doing something else. A little bit like the sentence from Catch Me If You Can, why do the Yankees always win? The other team can stop looking at the pinstripes. So it's like distracting people to actually go and do something that's not quite in their own interests. For example, this app was basically asking for permission to access all kinds of contacts, like starting with starting like with all the Facebook friends, the address book, and then again the Twitter friends. But at the end of this sequence of permission asked, basically it swapped the order of the buttons. So you were going to go cancel, you were always using the left button, but at the very last step, the one that actually sends the bulk invites to all the things that you have already done, basically the buttons are inverted, so you end up sending the invites. So this is the sort of dark patterns that enables you to actually make people do something that they really don't want to. In this case, by total mistake on the user's part. But it is misleading. They actually changed this back, but only after the growth hacking happened. So everyone is using like these little tricks. Then there is the price comparison prevention, which is a sort of an example of what I was saying before. There are some dark patterns that actually go out in the product with no intentional actual behavior, sort of design. In this case, basically people could order pizza in the specialty pizzas and go with a specific price, but then in another navigation path, they could reach the same pizza from the offers and pay a different amount, sort of half the amount. But there was nothing preventing people to actually buy it on the primary navigation, the one that we already seen with the higher price. They could complete totally all the process and buy the same pizza for a higher amount of money, and nothing was preventing them from doing that. So it is a dark pattern, but it is a dark pattern by mistake, very likely. Another sort of dark pattern is the roadblock, which is when you restrict or stop the completion of a user's task with something else. And since maybe they are already going with this, they will hit on whatever you present them. And this is sort of the technique that was used by Flappy Bird, because they had the review buttons at the end of the level, right when you have the reply, basically, or the continue, to actually go on with the game. And so many people were hitting the review just by mistake, and then they would land on the Apple page to do the review, and why not? Okay, let's give him these 5 stars. So at a certain point, they were getting something like 600 reviews a day. And Flappy Bird was at the top of all the charts, just by doing this. Then they switched it back, but, mission accomplished already, so that's fine. This is also something used with the banners and stuff like that. For example, so many interstitial ads apply also the sort of the misleading way of switching between the reply and the close button. So sometimes you have to click on the left, sometimes on the right, to actually escape the nightmare of another replay of the same advertising. And the same goes with the banners, the native banners that actually are part of the user interface, sort of. They can basically try to disguise them as something which is not an advertisement. And this is also a dark pattern. So you lure people into tapping into that area thinking that it is part of the app and will do something relevant for me. For banners, usually they are put, if you are a dark pattern guy, are put very close to parts that are functional to the app. So you can end up hitting them just by mistake with your clumsy, clumsy finger. So these are the kind of roadblock that we can use if we want to create dark patterns with that. The last part is about reviews manipulation, which is something really peculiar to mobile apps. At the start of the review process, many people were just asking nicely to have a review. But at some point, some very clever guy thought, I should funnel bad reviews to my own, email address. And so they basically devised this kind of process where you're asking for a review, but you first ask, is it good or not? If it is good, you can go and put it on the store. If it is bad, please tell it to me, because I will do something about that. But basically what they want to achieve is that the bad review is not published on the store. It's not public. It's just for my own eyes. And there are nice ways to do that. So we can actually embrace this dark pattern, but make it a little bit less dark. The best one, this is one good way, meaning you are pretty much, not talking about reviews. You're talking about the emotional state of the guy which is using your app. Are you happy? Are you confused? Are you unhappy? If you're happy, we can advise him to write a review. If he's confused, we can also give him a contact with my support team. If he's just unhappy, then please contact our team so we can understand why you are unhappy and we can improve. This is another way, another nice way of doing the same thing with sort of a in-app banner, of a native banner. This is very compact and basically tells the same thing. The good thing about this kind of stuff is that you are not actually make the people think that the review is published, so it's still fine. Basically, the difference between persuasion and being shady, using dark patterns, is that if we want to help people, we have to nudge them into the behavior we want them to have. But it's still important that we keep a transparent behavior toward them, and we don't become manipulative and coercive in a way. We don't become deceptive. So thank you guys for your attention. I don't know if there is much time left for the questions, but
about 2 minutes or so, if anyone has anything.
Yes, please.
Things, for instance, like sneaking into a car that you pay for, isn't that somehow illegal? Or because sometimes it touches illegal things like that, I would say, right?
Yeah, it's sort of, you don't have so many regulations about things like that, but it's quite similar to suggested items. The problem is that it's different to suggest and to put into the cart. A similar thing to that would have been done nicely using basically a component to list the suggested items, which is something that Amazon, for example, does. In that case, the problem was that the item would go directly in the cart, so just by mistake or by lack of attention, the user could basically go on and check out with an item that he never put into the cart. start. So yeah, I don't think there are any explicit laws preventing this, because I've never found any, mention to that. But of course, we all know that this is something that is not nice. But in the infancy of internet, it was really like Western. So they were doing all sorts of crazy stuff with dark patterns.
The image of Foursquare, I think. Foursquare. You said that they do lazy requesting, so that was a good thing. But you had the last screen was, would you like to have notifications and a big button? Yes. And then down below there was
yes.
a regular link saying no.
Yeah, that's right. Because there are some permissions that are usually asked at the start, and some other ones that it's better to keep in the lazy, strategy. Like notifications and location services, if they are really necessary to your app right from the start, are usually asked for at the beginning. It's the camera or contact book or something like that that makes more sense to ask when you're actually going to use them. Say, for example, the location service, it is Foursquare, so it is very related to where you are. If that was not their core, their core business, also the location services could have been moved to a lazy example. Yeah, basically the example was just about the good priming, not the lazy, because this depends actually on whatever you have to do with your app.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for. If you could vote on your way out on the tablet, and there's also the Cisco Greenhouse VR experience trying out thing downstairs. So that's only for today, so you should give it a go before tomorrow. It won't be here. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, guys.